Hi, welcome to your first PowerPoint. This PowerPoint, like all the others, is going to introduce the chapter that you're reading. So this is the chapter Wheeler, Becker, Glover, Volume 1, Chapter 1, and as you'll see, it's introducing the topic of Roanoke. So these are not meant to be exhaustive. We're just going to look at some key ideas in the chapter, or in some cases, some missing information. So some key ideas from the chapter that you should notice while you're reading, and I'll try to emphasize them here. First of all, the English are late in colonizing the New World. First, you get the Spanish and the French, and it's the experiences of the Spanish and the French that really propel the English into colonization. So I've selected a couple of things here to take note of. First of all, the material success of the Spanish in particular. And then secondly, and I wish this was more of a factor in terms of people's souls, but I think it's probably more political than anything else. There's a concern about the spread of Roman Catholicism. But I'd say really it's that material success, the fact that the Spanish are bringing home all of that gold, and it's really adding to their prosperity and material success. That's really making the English jealous, and that's why they engage in the privateering and all these other things that you're going to read about. And then some other key ideas from the chapter. I can't emphasize the experience of Ireland as a trend-setting example of English colonization. So before the English begin colonization attempts in the New World, they really try it first in Ireland. And the text points out very briefly that, first of all, there's this belief in English superiority that the English get from their experiences of colonization in Ireland, and that in some ways the sense of English superiority causes the justification of violence in their colonization. So instead of trying to achieve their ends through peaceful negotiation, very quickly the sense that, hey, we're the English, we should be in charge of this place, leads the English into violent confrontations. And so, as the text points out, emboldened by their experiences in Ireland, the West Country men soon set their sights on America. So it's the very same men who colonize in Ireland who attempt to do so in the New World. And so what you'll see as you're reading through both the background section as well as the evidence section is that even though the English are in the minority, they have a sense that they're the ones who should have this territory, and they do tend to quickly resort to violence when they don't just get what they want. And that obviously has pretty negative consequences for the early colonization efforts in Roanoke. One other major idea that's really implicit in the chapter is this concept of middle grounds. Sometimes historians talk about it as a borderlands, but this concept of middle grounds is everywhere in the chapter, but they don't actually use that term in the chapter. So this is a concept I want you to be aware of as you're reading through, especially the evidence section of the text. So for a long time, the way that historians looked at the relationship between the Europeans and the Indians in the New World was really based on conquest, and that's really associated with the Spanish colonization. So too often the story of conquest is one that we sort of accept for other groups coming to the North and South Central America area. But that's really not the most accurate way to look at the relationship between Europeans, especially the French, but then also, at least initially, the English. And so the middle grounds concept recognizes usually the very early stages of European and Native American contact, particularly for the French and the English. And so the middle grounds recognizes that at least in those early years of negotiation, the Europeans do not yet have the upper hand. And that's because population-wise, the Native Americans outnumbered the English at least at first. And of course, in terms of their knowledge about the world and how to survive in it, again, the Native Americans are the ones with the edge. So, what historians then talk about is that there's a lot of negotiation and even attempt to play by the Native American rules. And so, what you're going to see is the English are going to try to curry favor with the Native Americans through the use of gift giving. And then also notice the role played by Manteo on page 4 and 5, but then again in the evidence section on 23. Manteo is someone from the Roanoke Islands who goes with the English, learns the English language, helps teach an Englishman the language of his people, and so that there's a lot more give and take actually than just one group of people coming in and dominating the other. And yet, even though there's more give and take, at least in these early stages, there is this tendency towards militaristic activity, which perhaps caused some of the big problems for the English colonizers in Roanoke. And so I've given you some pages to look at. Notice page 5 again from the background section, but then page 21 has a pretty good discussion of some of the violence that the English resorted to, including chopping off people's heads and putting them on pikes. So not really probably the smartest idea if you're trying to negotiate with a group of people who still outnumber you and still know how to support themselves when you clearly do not know how to support yourselves. The other thing to point out too is that both sides, the Indians and the English, clearly have different expectations about the other. It's going to be very clear, especially in sources 1 and 2, what the English ideas are, the English expectations are regarding colonization. They want something that's going to provide them with material success. But if you'll notice, the Indians also have ideas about what they are hoping to gain from the English. Why don't they just kill them all off when they come to their shores? Well, it's because, these Indians have ongoing conflicts with other Indian tribes in the area, and maybe they saw the English as a potential ally. It's hard to know, but you should look for the fact that both sides have expectations, and so there's actually a lot of negotiation that goes on. It's not just one side dominating the other. And so that's what we mean by the concept of middle grounds. All right, so just a comment or two on the role of disease in European contact with Native Americans. The textbook again mentions this so briefly early on in the background section, but it's really the opinion of, I think, the majority of historians who look at the history of Native Americans and Europeans, at least in the early stages, that disease is probably the biggest, it plays the biggest role in contributing to the decline of the Native Americans. So what you see before you right now is a table. This is a table I put together based on estimates that have changed over the years of how many Native Americans lived in North America prior to European conflict or contact, I should say. And so in the 1830s, you see George Catlin. This is still the highest estimate of Native Americans, 16 million. You'll notice that his source for this estimate is oral legends of Indian tribes. And so based on Native American sources, there were 16 million Native Americans living in North America prior to contact with Europeans. If you look at just even the next row, the 19th century general consensus, however, was that there was actually less than 1.15 million Native Americans. And this is based on the idea that Native Americans were way too primitive to support a large society. And so the difference between those two numbers indicates that perhaps, for example, the impact of the Europeans was actually less harsh. So if you've only got 1.15 million and then that number decreases to 500,000, well then, the role of disease or conflict really wasn't maybe that horrible compared to, say, 16 million, when obviously that's that is horrible. The estimates do vary. They vary all the way into the 1960s. And in the 1960s, we've got Henry Dobbins as part of a new wave of scholarship who's looking at birth and death records kept by Catholic priests. So this is not still Indian sources, but looking at birth and death records that were kept by Catholic priests, that number shoots back up to 10 to 12 million. And that's kind of interesting because we're trying to look at maybe more objective written sources, and yet even those objective written sources by the enemy, if you will, are at 10 to 12 million. So then in textbooks I've used in the past, the estimates continue to vary, 4 million in one, 10 million in another. And all this suggests is that we really don't know what the impact of European contact with Native Americans was in terms of the numbers. But I will say that most of the stuff that I've looked at more recently suggests that in many cases up to 90% of an Indian tribe was actually wiped out by disease. And of course, disease is devastating because it not only decimates the population of your tribe, but it also potentially, takes out your major leaders, whether military, whether religious. And so that also then contributes to a fairly easy defeat by the Europeans, who are in a better position with regard to weapons, even if they don't start out being in a better position with regard to population. The other thing too I should just point out is that this is something that matters. When you look at the 1993 to the 2004 source, you've basically lost or gained 6 million people. And that's kind of a sacred number in history. The other time that you might have heard the 6 million figure is in the Holocaust number, in terms of how many people lost their lives in the Holocaust. So you have to account for a Holocaust's worth of people there. So this does matter, and it's probably something that historians and anthropologists together will keep looking at in order to determine just how devastating contact was for the Native Americans. Okay, that's the end. I think I've kept it relatively short for you, and so now you should read the chapter. You should post on the discussion forum, and then the quiz on the chapter is open all week. So good luck with that. Once you open it, you do have to finish it, but it's unlimited time, and you can certainly go through the chapter as you're taking the exam. It's an open book style quiz. So good luck with that, and yeah, look for the next PowerPoint.